All right, guys, we're going over the review sheet. Your test is tomorrow. Okay, we'll figure out when to get you to take that. Well, you're going to have to figure out a time to take it. All right. Yep, I'll pull y'all. I'll talk to Denny and, well, to figure it out, I'll probably pull you in 8th hour. Well, my thought is you're missing class for sports miss, but I can talk, I'll talk with Denny. We can get it figured out. But, all right, let's look at problem number 2 first. 36x squared minus 49b squared. Again, one of the first things with factoring you need to be looking for is the greatest common factor. Is there something that goes into both of those two terms? So there is no greatest common factor. Now we do have two things being subtracted. So there's a chance that this is a difference of perfect squares. Now what times itself is 36? 6, and then x squared would be x. Now what times itself is 49b squared? 7b. So this is indeed a difference of perfect squares. So a squared minus b squared, a plus b times a minus b. A plus b times a minus b. So this is indeed a difference of perfect squares. And what's taking the place of a? 6x, and b is 7b. So a plus b would become 6x plus 7b. A minus b would become 6x minus 7b. That's it. Question number 2. Pretty good with this here. Are you ready for the next one? Question number 2. So 4x squared plus 12x plus 9. Is there a greatest common factor between these three terms? No. So we move on to our second step, our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term. Third term is negative, the signs are opposite. Here, the third term is, so the signs are the same and match the sign of the middle term, so we'd have plus and plus. Once we get this set up, we'll look at the factors of the first and third term. First term is 4x squared, but the factors of x squared are x and x. Now, factors of 4 are 1 and 4 or 2 and 2. Which set of factors do we want to use first? 2 and 2. Factors of 9 are 1 and 9 or 3 and 3. Which set of these factors do we want to use first? Try first. 3 and 3. Now, the middle term we're trying to get is 12x. The last thing we can do is check. 2x times 3 is going to be positive 6x. 3 times 2x is also going to be positive 6x. And 6x plus 6x is 12x. That is the middle term we wanted. So these are our factors. Questions so far? Questions on number 3. Because really 2 and 3 here are the same thing. Same type problem. Greatest common factor, 2 sets of parentheses. Signs. All right. Questions on 4 or 5? Either one of those that y'all want to see worked. 5. 8x squared plus 6x minus 27. Is there a number or term? Greatest common factor between these three terms? No. So we move on to our two sets of parentheses with three spaces. Since the third term is negative, the signs would be opposite. One's going to be positive, one is going to be negative. Now at this point here, it doesn't really matter which one's positive, which one's negative. We need to set one as positive and one as negative. And then we'll move on to our first and third term. Now the first term, 8x squared, well, the x squared will be x and x. Now factors of 8, 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Which one do we want to try first? 2 and 4. Factors of 27, 1 and 27, 3 and 9. Which of these factors do we want to try first? 3 and 9. And lastly, after we plug them in, we need to check and make sure we do get the middle term of positive 6x. 2x times negative 9. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18x. 3 times 4x is going to be positive 12x. Negative 18x minus, or negative 18x plus 12x. Negative 18 plus 12 is negative 6x. Yes. So since we got the correct number but wrong sign, all we need to do is flip the signs. So we'll change the plus to minus and the minus to plus, because now we have 2x times positive 9, which would be positive 18x. Negative 3 times 4x would be negative 12x, which will give us a positive 6x, which is what we wanted. Questions on these here? Six. Is there a greatest common factor? No, 1 kind of gives that away, because now the next thing is this could be, we have two terms, no greatest common factor. It's either going to be a difference of perfect squares or a difference of two cubes. X squared can't be a cube, because if it's a cubic, it has to be the what? Third power. So if this is going to be either one, it's going to be a difference of perfect squares. Now the easy one out of these two, what times itself is 1? 1. Now we need to figure out what times itself is 64x squared. Well, we know we'll have x and 8. If you're not sure, we can always take the square root of 64 and see what that is. Square root of 64 is 8. So we have 8x and 1. So we do have our difference of perfect squares, our a squared minus b squared, which will factor to a plus b times a minus b. A in our case is what? 8x, and b is 1. So a plus b would be 8x plus 1. A minus b would be, that's it. Any questions on any of this so far? All right. Questions on number 7? We have two terms. So the main ways that these two terms are going to factor is going to be one of 4 ways. It's going to be either have just a greatest common factor, or have a greatest common factor kind of be a difference of perfect squares, sum or difference of perfect cubes. One of those two there. Now, is there a greatest common factor between a cubed and 1? No. It's not going to be a difference of perfect squares at this point because, well, squares. A squared, a cubed is not a square. It's a cube, yes? So the best case scenario, a cubed plus 1 is that we're looking at a sum of two cubes. And factors in this general form. And again, we can treat it the same way we just did with the difference of perfect squares. What times itself 3 times is a to the third. That would be a, because the cubed root of a to the third is a. Yes? What's the cubed root of 1? Question so far? Because really, doing this finds what's going to go in the place of A and what's going to go in the place of B. So for this here, what's taking the place of A? Well, A. So what's taking the place of B? 1. So our first set of parentheses is A plus B. Well, that's going to now be what? A plus 1. We replaced A with A, B with 1. It's not always going to be A with A. It's just the variables we got. In the bigger set of parentheses, we have our A term squared, which means for us we're going to have our A term being squared. I would put in parentheses because it might not always just be A. Because if it's 2A, 3A, we're going to have to square both the number and the variable. So we'll put it in parentheses. Minus, our middle is A times B. So our A is A and our B term is 1. Plus our B terms being squared, so we would have 1 squared. Questions on those here? So all we really did was go through and just replace A with its term, B with its term. Now we just need to simplify. Now the first set of parentheses, the A plus 1 here is just going to be A plus 1. That is as simplified as it gets. Our next thing we're having to simplify is A squared. Well, that is just, well, A squared. Minus A times 1 is, well, A plus 1 squared. 1. That's it. Oh. I'm going to skip down to, let's say, 12. Because let's look at another cubic. 2,197 x cubed minus 216. Does it look like there's a greatest common factor between these two? No. So let's just check and see if there's a cubed root of 2,197. 13. Cubed root of 216. So that tells us that this is a difference of perfect square, or difference of perfect cubes, or difference of two cubes, because the cubed root of 2,197 x cubed, well, the 2,197 is going to be 13, and x cubed is x. Now, the cubed root of 216 was 6. So it is a difference of two cubes. Now, the general form, a cubed minus b cubed, is a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. So what's a in our case? A is 13x, b is 6. So all we're going to do is replace a and b all the way through. So the first thing is what? A minus b. So what's a? 13x minus b, which is a squared. So our a term is 13x and it's b squared. Plus, we have a times b. So 13x times 6. Plus, b squared, which would be 6 squared. Because our a squared, b squared, we're taking that whole term and squaring it. Now that 13x minus 6, let's just 13x minus 6. 13x squared. We have to square 13. 13 times 13 is 169. X squared is just x squared. Middle term, 13 times 6. 78. And we have our x plus 6 squared is 1 of the biggest giveaway that's on this test that it's probably going to be a sum or difference of two cubes, are x to the third, y to the third, that variable to the third power. If you're not finding a perfect cube for the numbers, that means there's probably a greatest common factor you're going to have to pull out. I'd start low with those numbers for greatest common factors. If it's hard to see it, try 2, then 3, 4, and go up from there. Start low, go high to find those numbers. Questions on 12? Questions on 13? How do we feel about the sum or difference of two cubes? Feel a little better now? Questions? So the difference between our sum and difference is the start, because the first one, sum, is going to be a cubed plus b cubed.
So like on 13 when I use the
Because here, we're saying that these two here, 370a cubed and 192b cubed, are being added. So they are the sum of two cubed terms. So we'd use the sum. And if it's subtraction, it would be the difference. Now, here, is there a greatest common factor between these two? Okay, so we can come over here and see what the cubed root of 375 is. Well, there is no cubed root. So there might be a greatest common factor. So there is a greatest common factor of 3. All right, guys, focus in. So here, when we took the cubed root of 375, we got a decimal, which means it doesn't have a cubed root. There's not a number multiplied by itself 3 times. All the ones on the test are either going to have a greatest common factor or be factorable. So here, the cubed root told us there's not a cubed root of it. So there either has to be a greatest common factor for this here. So there is, it is 3, because we could try 2. 375 is not going to be divisible by 2. It's not an even number. So 3 would be the next one. It does work for both. Now before we call that one done, let's just check the cubed roots again. Cubed root of 125 is 5. Cubed root of 64 is 4. So it is a difference of two, or a sum of two cubes. We just had to factor that 3 out. Now the cubed root of 125, a cubed, okay. All right, let's try that again. Cubed root 125 is 5a. Cubed root of 64. All right, guys, focus, focus, focus. Now, 3. Now for our sum of two cubes, our first part is a plus b. So our a term here is 5a. Plus our b term is 4b. A squared would be our 5a squared minus a times b would be 5a times 4b plus our b squared, which would be our 4b squared. Questions on this here? Where you can see how what's taking the place of a and b on this. I will leave those equations up on the whiteboard. Now the only other thing we have left to do is to simplify this. The 3 has to be there. It's part of the greatest common factor. Our 3a plus 4b. Now 5a squared, 5 times 5. 25. A times a is a squared. We're just squaring it, we're multiplying it by itself. 5a times 4b, 5 times 4. 20, and then we have ab. Plus our 4b squared. 4 squared is 16, and we have b squared. Questions on 8 through 18. Any one of those that y'all want to see or had questions on? Huh? Because it's either going to be some difference of, or it's going to either be difference of perfect squares, some are difference of 2 cubes, or our normal factoring. Because there's only 3 on the test that's just the greatest common factor, but then everything else factors like these. 11. Is there a term that goes in all 3? 7 and... Now, if we factor 7x squared out of 49x to the 4th, if I factor 7 out of 49, we're left with 7. If I factor x squared out of x to the 4th, we're left with x squared plus. If we factor 7 out of 343, we're left with 49. If we factor x out of x squared, we're left with x. Now, if we factor 7x squared out of 7x squared, we get plus 1. And that's it. Now, most of the ones on the test, when it's just a greatest common factor, kind of like 11, what's inside is going to end up just being 2 terms. Yes, let's look at 15. Also, 10's not on the test. 15. Is there a greatest common factor between these 3 terms? Third term is, so the signs are opposite. All right, guys, focus in. Factors of a squared, our first term. A. Factors of 6 are, which one do we want to try first? A times negative 3 would be negative 3a. 2 times a is plus 2a. Negative 3a plus 2a is negative a. That's it. Any other questions on 8 through 18? Okay. If there's no questions on 8 through 18. Questions on 19 through 22.
Yeah. 22. No, I want 29.
22. Well, there's going to be a greatest common factor of y, because they both have. And most likely there is a greatest common factor between the two of these numbers, and it is 2. 2 goes into both of them. Now 2 goes into 31,250, and we get 15,625 x cubed minus our 93,312 does have a greatest common factor of 2, and when we factor it out, we get 46,656. Now, if we take the cubed root of 15,625, we get 25x. And if we take the cubed root of 46,656, we get 36. So these are perfect cubes. And since they're being subtracted, we're using our difference of 2 cubes. A cubed minus b cubed is equal to a minus b times a squared plus ab plus b squared. So 2y. So our first one's a minus b. All right. A is 25x minus b, so 25 minus 36. Our next one term is a squared, so we would have 25x being squared plus ab, so 25x times our b term, which is 36, plus b squared. Now the 2y times 25x minus 36 is going to be the same. Now at this point here, we do need to square our 25x. 25 squared is 625 x squared. Now we need to multiply 25x times 36, and 25 times 36 is 900, and we still have our x. And 36 squared is 1,296. Same process as what we did even with our a cubed plus 1. Instead of having a and just 1, we have 25 and 36. It does make the numbers bigger, but most of that, the 25 squared, 36 squared, 25 times 36, the little yellow calculator will do that for us. Really, this test, you don't even need the graphing calculator. I can, but it's, y'all aren't, I told y'all to mark those off. All right. Questions on 27 or 28? 27 or 28? So the 3 we just skipped. Yep. "27. Is there a greatest common factor between these two terms?" 12x squared. 12 goes into both, and since both of them do have the variable x squared. Now, if we factor 12x squared out of 12x cubed, 12 factors out completely, and we can remove 2 x's from x cubed, leaving us with x. 12 factored out of 144 is 12. x squared factors out completely. That's as far as it goes. And especially if here that first variable became x to the first, that's as simplified as it gets, first power. Let's look at 28. Greatest common factor between 15x squared and 30x. 15x. And if we factor 15x out of 15x squared, we're left with x plus 2. Questions on this here? I'm going to add one. Let's say 21x cubed y cubed